on one second. We'll get it all turned on. We'll get it going. Hope everybody had a great day. Hope you didn't get caught out there in the storm and get too bad. So I'm here. I'm just trying to figure out how do I get my, I started my podcast last night to see if we could put it on Spotify. And so I got ready to start today. And of course it didn't show up at the right exact screen. And so, and so we're all over the place. But I think I've just about got it. So I'm ready to go. I promise you, I'm ready to go. It's going to be a great show tonight. We're going to get this thing going. Just got to get all my buttons pushed, and that's it. And I think I got one more to do, and then we're going to be in great shape. So, all right, now we're going. 3, 2, 1, and I'm going in all kinds. I got all kinds of cameras going, and I'm here. So, hey, it's Jason Clemmons. This is Life with Jason Clemmons, DC, and we're coming to you tonight live from the Rock Health and Wellness Center studios, and we're all over the place. We're on social media at the Rock Health and Wellness Centers. We're on YouTube at Health from the Rock. We're on X at Jason Clemmons, DC. We're going to be on Spotify at Life with Jason Clemmons, DC. We are live on the radio at 98.7 Walk by Faith Radio, and we are on 1420 AM Lubbock Christian Nation, and we are streaming at 987radio.com. So, yeah, so we're great. We're great. We got texts coming in already, and but we had a request a few weeks ago to do a show, and I'm gonna attempt to do it tonight. And what I don't get done with it tonight, I'll do again tomorrow. So I got asked to do a show on. Let me read it to you. It says, "Hey, Dr. C, I'm wondering if maybe you could do a show at some point on how important your diet and sugar consumption and all those things are for the things that people are battling with in their brain, example, anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, etc." And so that's what we're going to tackle tonight. We're going to get after it, and I'm going to just use the whole time and try to explain as much of it as I can. And I'm going to use help from the guys that teach me, because I promise you one thing, it's impossible to know all the things out there. There's a lot of smart guys out there that know a lot of things, but not everybody knows everything. And when you're doing wellness, it is a difficult task at times, because you're really responsible for the whole entire body from top to bottom, the physical, chemical, and the mental, emotional stress. And when we're trying to help you out, we're trying to look at all of those things at the same time, because we're not going to specialize. This world that we live in today has just become so specialized. There's just every there's so many different. You just go to one doctor, and then they only going to look at their one little slice, and then they're going to send you to the next doctor, and then that doctor is just going to look at their one little slice, and then, I don't look at that. I'm a urologist, and so I don't look at your cardiology stuff. So I'll send you to the cardiologist, and then the cardiologist sends you over there, and it says, well, this might be a depression thing, so I'm going to send you to the psychologist, and then the psychologist over here, but before you know it, you've been all over the place. And in chiropractic wellness, what we're trying to find is the interference in the nervous system. And so because we're looking for the interference in the nervous system, all of those things now become part of the things that we look at. So there's a lot of things on the table when we're trying to help somebody. And since we started our new brain mapping and neurofeedback program, and we have the technology here in the office, we've already seen some amazing changes in brains, and we're already seeing some things that are different than a lot of that we've seen in the past. But it's different when you put this type of tool into a wellness facility. And I had this conversation. I just had this conversation on the phone with a patient that called this afternoon, and I had this conversation this weekend because it's a different application in our office than it might be in some other offices that you've been to. Doing neurofeedback, and I'll I will have a show on it really soon. But during doing neurofeedback in a wellness facility is not to treat anxiety, depression, concentration issues, all that sort of thing. It's to try to determine where you have interference in your nervous system. And I now can see above your neck. For the first time, I've been able to see pathways. Like we can check posture and see how your body is firing one way or the other, and we can see whether or not your hand is rotated in, or your foot's flaring, or your head's tilted to one side. We could do that type of thing. I can send you through some ranges of motion and analyze the way that your body's moving, and get an idea of how the pathways are firing in your brain. But I can't get a real good picture of those pathways until now. I can get a better picture, and it's really exciting. And so, am I trying to take this tool and use this tool of neurofeedback to treat your quote disease? No, because I don't believe in your quote disease in the first place, right? I'm not like you've got depression. Okay, what is it? What does depression mean? What is happening with depression? What's the physiology and the neurology of depression? And what are we going to do about that? That's really what I'm interested in, is how do we solve your problem? How do we find the source of your problem and how we solve your problem? And so it's kind of really cool for us to do that. So we've started doing the neurofeedback, and we got this question. Could you do a show to point how important your diet and sugar consumption is to all those things, for the things that people are battling with, brain, anxiety, and depression? So I'm going to tackle that tonight. And I didn't even get this done, changed. I got it now. All right. You guys on the radio are like, what is he talking about? But you guys on social media, y'all saw what I just did right there. Just fix that little thing. Okay. So let's get into this whole thing, and let's see if I can make an attempt to try to really do a better job. And we've covered this book before, and we've shown this a lot of times. This is The Hacking of the American Mind, and this is Dr. Robert Lustig. And I've been studying Dr. Robert Lustig's work since 2009. This is not something that's new to us at the Rock Health and Wellness Center. This is something that we've been doing for a long time. But this book is, I don't know, this copyright of this book is after it's just recent. Let's see. 2017 is the copyright, I believe, on this book. And so this is relatively new, that breaks it down. So, but I just thought I would try to make an attempt to explain to you what's going on inside your brain when you get with anxiety and depression from a dopamine standpoint, because I think dopamine is something that we can all kind of start to understand a little bit and get a little bit better understanding of what is happening. And so inside our brains, we have what this all boils down to is motivation to attain reward is the big deal. It's all about reward. If we didn't have reward, we wouldn't do anything. Like, we literally wouldn't do anything. And we have a system. I'm getting it really broken down in the Archaeology of the Mind with Jaak Paintsep in that book. But we have a seeking system, and the seeking system is basically driven by dopamine. There's other neurotransmitters that are involved in this whole thing, and how they make it go faster or they slow it down. But I'm not going to get into all of those different neurotransmitters tonight. I'm just going to get into a few of them so that you kind of have an idea of what's going on. But it's all about reward. That's what we're seeking. The motivation to attain reward. eat, fight, mate, remains virtually intact and unchanged throughout our evolution. It makes sense that the reward is a pretty strong and unflagging driver of emotion. So there's two types of reward. There's motivation or desire, and there's consummation and pleasure. And so those two things run off of two different systems. We have a motivation and a desire pathway, and the pathway is actually inside our brain. And we're going to break it down tonight and make it really simple. And we're going to I should just show it to you as we're going through it. But and I'll try to talk it for you guys on the radio. I'll try to talk through this to make it as clear as possible. But let's just talk about this. Let's try to see if we can understand our motivation pathway. Motivation pathway means, man, I sure could use a bowl of ice cream right now. Like if it's getting time to eat, 6:15. Some of you guys are eating right now. Some of you guys have already eaten. Some of you are getting ready to eat. It's like you thought about it earlier. Man, I'm getting hungry. I want to go get something to eat. I want to cook something. What are we having tonight? Well, what sounds good? What is it that we could? What are we making tonight? And those are questions that are driven, that we start asking ourselves when we start releasing our dopamine in our brain. And the way that it works is we're firing those systems inside the brain from different parts of the brain. So let's just talk about two main parts of the brain. Let's draw the brain, and let's don't even do it that way, because let's just make this whole sheet the brain. Okay, let's make this entire. We'll just make the entire sheet. We'll just say that we're just working inside the brain tonight. And we've got two different structures. We've got the ventral tegmental area, which is the VTA. And I'm not going to draw this to scale or anything. I'm just going to draw it so that I can draw on the sheet right here. And the nucleus accumbens. And those are just two parts of your brain. And they're don't worry about where they are. Don't worry about what that is, other than the fact that you've got two nucleuses. We've got these little bundles inside our brain. We've got different places and different parts. Just like inside my building right here, I'm in my studio. This is my office. But I've got a front desk. I've got a nutrition center over there where we do our brain mapping. We have a fitness gym. We have an Ultra G treadmill. We have a decompression table. We've got two adjusting rooms. We have a new patient center. We have a conference room. All these different places that are inside of our building, right? Well, our brain has the same thing. It's got different places. And it's like, okay, well, where do you take x-rays? Well, I take x-rays in my x-ray room. That makes sense, right? And then we have our staff meetings in our conference room. So we'll go to our conference room and have staff meetings. And then Leslie handles the stuff at the front desk. So each part of our building, if the building was our brain, then our brain has different sections that have different functions. And one of the sections is the ventral tegmental area, or just call it the VTA. And what happens here is that this is where dopamine is made. Let's see if I can get all this together. So this is where we make the neurotransmitter dopamine. It's a chemical. It's a chemical that is made. And what's going to happen is whenever we start that seeking mechanism, whenever we start that reward pathway, when we start to seek, when we get the motivation to do something, we're going to release dopamine, and it's going to travel through a nerve, and it's going to travel over here to the nucleus accumbens. So we're going to release dopamine into, and I'll just make it really simple. We're just going to release dopamine into the nucleus into the nerve bundle that's going to travel over to the nucleus accumbens. Okay, and then we're going to release it, and it's going to synapse. There's like a little gap right there, and we're going to release this dopamine into that area as it travels through there, and it's going to release into the area, and now it's going to fire or excite the neurons in the nucleus accumbens. And I don't want to get very much further than that. But when we go back to our two different types of what it boils down to right here is motivation or desire is going to start over here in the VTA, and we're going to release dopamine, and it's going to travel over, and then consummation or pleasure is where we're going to feel the results of it over in the nucleus accumbens. And that's basically where we're going right there. And over here in the nucleus accumbens, what we're going to get, it's mediated by a class of neuromodulators that are called endogenous opioid peptides. So those two things. So what we're talking about tonight is we're talking about the ventral tegmental area firing dopamine into the nucleus accumbens and stimulating endogenous opioid peptides so that we can the pleasurable experience, the pleasurable sensation that EOPs generate in the consummation of reward are all experienced inwardly. Thus, on the outside looking in, it's the dopamine effect we see, but we're experiencing that on the inside. That's kind of what's happening whenever we have a motivation that's firing through into the other side, and then we get these EOPs released, and now it's like, oh, that was great. It was like I wanted a Reese's cup. Something told me I needed to go get a Reese's cup. I needed to go. I just got to go get that. I want to go. I want that, and I want to go experience it. And then if I go and I just have one little bite, oh, I just get that great feeling, and all of a sudden I feel good about it, and then I can keep going. I can keep moving forward in life. I can keep functioning in life if I'll follow that. Otherwise, I'm just going to sit under a tree and do nothing. If I don't have any dopamine, I'm not going to do anything at all. I'm not going to have any desire to get going, and I'm never going to feel like I've accomplished anything. So I'm just going to be flat. I'm going to have a very flat personality. I'm not going to have much motivation. I'm just going to do nothing. Well, there's no possible way that we could survive as human beings if we did nothing. We at least have to eat, and we at least have to have sex, or this old thing's going to stop. I know it's pretty dang simple. We don't have to get much complicated than that, but that's the truth. We only have to do those two things. It's easy either way, right? So that's what we're trying to accomplish, and so we have to accomplish that. We have to accomplish that. So while there are other several peptides and neurotransmitters involved in the facilitating of the reward response, for ease of explanation, we can just discuss this pathway of dopamine. And virtually all pleasurable activities, sex, drugs, alcohol, food, gambling, shopping, the internet, employ the dopamine pathway in the brain. If you can put a holic on it, if you're a shopaholic or a sexaholic or a chocolateaholic or whatever, if you can do that, then the dopamine pathway is in play, and it kind of is a fulcrum. Dopamine is the fulcrum on which the reward tips your scale or trips your trigger or floats your boat. The motivation pathway is a conduit between these two structures. the ventral tegmental area, and the nucleus accumbens. So dopamine is a Jekyll and Hyde neurotransmitter. Without it, you're a couch potato, and too much can aggressive, and you can get too much of it, and you get aggressive and paranoid. And it runs on a bell curve. And we have talked about the bell curve a lot in the past. And the bell curve is for you guys on the radio, we're drawing a bell curve. Just imagine a bell curve. And the middle of the bell curve is the sweet spot of the dopamine. And that's going to be, it's like 68%. That's like 68%. Let me see if he's got it in here. I might have actually been looking at a different book. But the middle of the bell curve, that is the exact amount of dopamine that we need. This is the sweet spot of dopamine, right there in the middle. It's like you hit that golf club right there on that sweet spot. I mean, the golf ball with your golf club, and you just feel that perfect that little perfect swing. It hits that perfect shot, and you hit it right in the sweet spot. Or when you hit a baseball right on the sweet spot of the bat, you'll just drive that thing. Like it just feels so good. It's just perfect. Well, anything that moves us to the right, if dopamine moves to the right, no, to the left. Let's start looking at the left. If dopamine moves to the left, then we get very lethargic. We get very low dopamine moving to the left gives us no motivation whatsoever. So it's down on the left side. And if we move to the right side and we get too far over here to the right side, then we have high dopamine and we get very irritable. And we get very agitated. And it just depends on where we stay during our normal day as to how we're going to behave. So wherever we are on this whole dopamine level if we're really low, then we're going to need something to move us towards the middle. We're going to need a stimulant. We're going to need something that's going to drive us towards the middle and towards the sweet spot of the bell curve. If we're high, we're going to need something to inhibit us and bring us back down and move us back to the middle of the bell curve. Now, different genetics might put us in different places, and different genetics there's been some research done, and Dr. Lustig, he mentions it in his book about where a person starts on the bell curve and what they need to get going. There's actually a set of genetics that keeps a person very low. Like you can have genetics that keeps you low. And so you need more. Let's just say food, for example, we need, in order to feel good about eating. And if you don't feel good about eating, then you're not going to eat. And some of us have experienced that, not everybody, but some of us have experienced that when it just nothing tastes good anymore, or we just get the same thing all the time and it's just not any good. And it's just like, this is not, I don't care. It's just like, so blah, right? But we got to eat something, right? So, but we actually there are some of us that have a genetic marker that keeps us low in dopamine, so that whenever we do eat, we have to eat more in order to get us into the sweet spot. Because if we don't, then that's a problem. And well, what does that do for us? That causes us to have more calories. And because it has more calories, it causes us to gain weight. And we start to increase our weight, and then we become obese because we're trying to eat to get us to the middle of the dopamine level. That's one of the things. That's one of the ways. There's another one I'm going to mention here on the show too. but that's just one of the ways that we will move into that direction like that. So I know you're like, what does this have to do with anxiety and depression and PTSD and all that sort of thing? Well, the behavior of having too much. Let's say you're in the sweet spot, but you keep going and you keep pushing yourself too far. Well, if you push yourself too far, now you're going to become irritable. It's going to be hard to deal with. There's also genetics in women, because one of the things that estrogen does is estrogen pushes us towards the right. The more that estrogen comes along, the more we move to the right. I got to take a break. I'm up on the break right here. I'll take a break, and then we'll be back right after these messages. And this is with Jason Clemmons, DC, and we're going to finish the second half and really talk about our food and what it has to do with our anxiety. I wasn't very eloquent in that first half of the show explaining that, but one of the things that will move us to the right is estrogen. So in a woman's cycle, there's two different times during a cycle that estrogen starts to spike. And so if we have a tendency, if a woman has a tendency to be on the left side of the bell curve, then when her estrogen spikes, it's going to move her towards the middle, and she might actually be very alert and aware and very calm, but alert and can get a lot of things done. She's very active. She's just very motivated. She's very motivated to get some stuff done. But estrogen also can move us even further to the right. So if she's in the middle, if she spends the majority of her month in the middle and is motivated and does stuff, and then all of a sudden that estrogen swing comes up with that cycle, it will push her over into the irritability part. And we know that's true because we know ladies who have that problem. They become very irritable and gripey and hard to get along with whenever they're pushed too far to the right side. And so it's not necessarily something that they can handle. It's not necessarily their fault ish. It depends on if we're doing things that are moving us that way. If you had 10 things that were moving you to the right, and 9 of those 10 things were things that you could control, and then estrogen was the 10th thing, then you were already choosing to do those other things that were moving you to the right. Then all of a sudden, estrogen comes along and it pushes you further. If you can make yourself healthier by really controlling those things and keeping your dopamine levels a little bit to the left, except for when you needed them, then you would be able to, when that estrogen came in, move you to the middle. So there is some control over that. It doesn't have to be just completely gone over to the other side. Okay, everybody, we're back. This is Life with Jason Clemmons, DC. We're talking about dopamine and its effect on the body and how it works. So this is this curve. So we got this bell-shaped curve, okay? And it'll move us anywhere from a couch potato or too aggressive and paranoid. And we want to be able to get to the middle. And so what are things that play havoc with that whole system right there? What are some of the things that play havoc with us that push us a little bit further out of the middle of the bell-shaped curve? Well, one of the things is obesity. And let me read this out of Dr. Lustig's book. This is Hacking of the American Mind, page 49. And it's talking about obesity. And it says, obesity plays havoc with your dopamine system in a very consistent ways. If you're obese, you're already past the central optimum, the central optimum on the right side of the dopamine curve. Stress will push you even further to the right. Then throw in a food cue, an advertisement for Oreos, and the dopamine in your head becomes so blaring you have nowhere to go but down. The hormone leptin, which comes from your fat cells and tells your brain you've had enough Haagen-Dazs, normally reduces dopamine firing and the reward center and moves you leftward on the curve. So leptin is one of the things. Leptin, which is released from your fat cells, is one of the things that moves you to the left. Okay? The hormone leptin, which comes from your fat cells and tells your brain you've had enough Haagen-Dazs, normally reduces dopamine firing in the reward center and moves you leftward in the curve. But when your neurons are leptin resistant, as seen in chronic obesity, leptin doesn't work. It can't extinguish that dopamine signal. Dopamine action stays high, and you're on your second to third to fourth pint, hoping for ever dwindling reward. If you want to learn more about leptin resistance, read his book, Fat Chance Beating the Odds Against Sugar, Processed Food, Obesity, and Disease. Furthermore, some people have genetic reasons for their obesity. Their nucleus accumbens are larger, and functional MRI shows that the nucleus accumbens lights up more in response to food commercials than do those whose weights are normal, thus driving increased interest in food. So if that's one of the things right there. But leptin resistance, right? And that's basically what this is all going to come down to, is the resistance part of it. Because what leptin gets released by your fat cells, and what resistance means is, on a cell, we've got lots of receptors. It sometimes makes me, it reminds me of like a trot line. If you've ever fished and you've run a trot line before, right? So if you guys have ever done that, there's a string that you might tie between two places. Let's say across a river or a pond or lake or something like that. You tie a string off over there to that tree, and then you run the string out here into the lake, and then you drop an antifreeze bottle full of sand or something down to the bottom as the anchor, right? You made your little anchor. I'm just saying that's what I've seen. I haven't done it myself. But you made an anchor over here, and you've got this long string that's running across, and you have a bunch of drop-down strings. And on those drop-down strings, you might have 3 or 4 or 5 hooks. So you might drop it down. This might be like a 5-foot string, and you've got all these little hooks that are on there, right? And the reason that you want all those hooks on that trot line is because when fish come by, you set the trot line and you bait it up, and then when fish come by, they bite the bait and they get hooked on it, and you might have 3 or 4 fish on this one stringer, and then you might have 3 or 4 fish on the next stringer. But you want to have as many opportunities to catch the fish as possible. Well, that's the same exact thing is what happens between the cells that in the nucleus accumbens and the cells that are trying to move us in the direction. And the same thing happens with insulin in our body. When we're naturally, the way that we naturally are made, and let me make a contrast to these so you can kind of see them a little better. But if you have a cell, you usually have a lot of receptors on that cell. And let's just say that all of these receptors are dopamine receptors. And let's say that those dopamine receptors are over here in this nucleus accumbens. So though this cell, because in nature, just think about it. If we didn't have Haagen-Dazs and we didn't have Bluebell and we didn't have Reese's Cups and we didn't have Jim Beam and we didn't have roulette wheels and we didn't have fast cars and we didn't have roller coasters, because all those things are man-made, right? What would we have in nature that would give us dopamine? We would have food, a little bit of it, not much of it, not a whole lot of it, and we would have sex. That would get it for us, and there wouldn't be a whole lot. We'd have to get it from nature. We'd have to see we'd have to see a baby's face, or maybe like a kitten or something, like some small animal that was cute, or some birds that made us feel good about things, or we might have some motivation to go eat, but we would have we would have very little dopamine. So when we have very little dopamine, then we need as many hooks on the cell. We need as many dopamine receptors as we can possibly get, because we want to increase the chances of catching the dopamine when it's released. Because all we need is just one little molecule of dopamine. If this thing is right around here, and this dopamine is released now into that little synapse, and we're hitting this cell, this nucleus accumbens cell, with dopamine. Man, if we just release one or two or three little molecules of dopamine, we got to hope like heck that it hits one of these receptors, and if it does, we're golden. That's awesome. That's exactly what we wanted to happen. We're like, yes, great. It's like one little bite. It's just one bite of the Reese's cup, just one little bite of the Reese's cup, and that gives us just a little bit of dopamine, and then all of a sudden, wow, we've reached our goal, and that's all we need. That's what Leslie can do. She just has the ability to just eat. When she eats cereal, she just eats a little bitty bowl of it, or she could just have one bite of bread, or she could just have just one little quarter of a cookie. Like Caitlin and Leslie did that a few, maybe last year sometime for a birthday or something. Went to Crumble Cookie because wasn't eating sugar, and we've really cut out sugar. So they went for their birthday, because you get a free cookie on your birthday, and they cut that thing into a quarter, and then they each had a quarter, and I guess they threw away the other quarter. I don't remember what they did, but they just had one little corner of that cookie, and that's all that Leslie needs in order to just feel rewarded. The pleasure of the cookie is just that one little amount. But me, what I have done is I have hit those receptors so many times. I've just hit them and hit them and hit them over and over and over again, with not just one quarter of it, but four cookies, or six cookies, or the entire bag of Reese's Cups, or the entire bag of Reese's Cups inside a bowl of Bluebell ice cream. It's like massive amounts of man-made dopamine, and I've hit that cell so many times that a couple things can happen. Number one is that we just downregulate. We don't destroy the cell. We just create what's called tolerance. And by creating tolerance, we just take that cell, that receptor, off of that cell wall, and now all of a sudden it's gone. It's not there anymore. We just took the trot line with all the hooks on it, and we went back by and took our pocket knife, and we just cut one of the lines that had four hooks on it and threw it in the boat. And then we went down a couple, and we just cut that line, and then we threw it in the boat. And then we just cut the next line, and then we threw it in the boat. That's what are the chances of catching fish? They're decreased, right? So we got to have a whole lot more fish swim by that line in order to catch a fish, because we have a reduced number of hooks on our line. That's what happens with us when we increase our dopamine over and over and over again. We will downregulate, or we will destroy. The other thing that we might do is we might actually destroy, which means it's not coming back. It's been destroyed. Now, if I decrease the number of receptors on the cell wall, how am I going to get the same level of motivation? I'm going to have a lot more dopamine in order to get the same level of motivation. That's what happens with us in different ways with cocaine and sugar and methamphetamines and all that sort of thing. And I want to read some of the ways that those things mess with us. Um, and so the the two things right there. The number one was obesity. That's one thing that moves us. The other one was estrogen, and we talked about estrogen, and it moves us to the right. Right. So those are two things that can do that. So let's talk about. Um, there are three separate modes of regulation of the dopamine pathway, and any of them can go haywire, skewing you to the left or to the right of the bell-shaped curve. Number one is synthesis. Dopamine is made or synthesized in the neurons of the VTA from the amino acid tyrosine, found in many foods. Ideally, dopamine concentrations in the VTA is tightly regulated and balanced. Too much dopamine causes a myriad of problems, including psychotic symptoms. Doctors once used the drug to reduce dopamine synthesis in schizophrenic patients. While they were successful in ameliorating symptoms of outlandish thoughts, the drug also caused the patients to feel severely depressed. Ultimately, these medications were removed from the market. They have also used drugs to increase dopamine production and or its release in order to treat chronic depression. This has proved to be helpful in some patients, but side effects of others include irritability, aggression, and paranoia. Medications affecting dopamine production are still being researched to try to find that bell-shaped curve. So that's one way. Number two is the action. After dopamine is released from the VTA axonal nerve terminal, it travels across the synapse where it binds to a dopamine receptor on the nucleus accumbens neuron. That's what we just described. The receptor right there is on the nucleus accumbens neuron. And it excites it, causes the nucleus accumbens to fire, thus generating reward. The number of receptors determines the magnitude of reward. We talked about that. There is a non-specific phenomenon known in medicine as the law of mass action, designed to limit each cell's exposure and vulnerability to chronic stimulation. It keeps everything in check. The things that the receptor number, things that change the receptor number, like genetics and drugs, will influence your position on the bell-shaped curve. So you want to, that's your body's trying to regulate about how many receptors it needs to kind of keep you where you're going to be, to try to keep you in the middle. But if you keep pounding it and keep pounding it and keep pounding it, then you'll keep pushing yourself to the right side of the curve, and then you're gonna cause some problems for yourself. Um, and this Eric Stice at Oregon Research Institute studied the eating habits of patients who harbor this TAC-A1 allele, and they possess 30 to 40% fewer receptors than the rest of the population. So if you have less receptors, then you need to eat more you need to eat more to give you more dopamine, and then you're going to get more calories, and it's going to cause a problem with obesity. Um, this is how the dopamine agonists work. In the 1950s, the original antipsychotic drug, Thorazine, and Haldol revolutionized psychiatry. Up to that point, schizophrenics required long-term or permanent stays in psychiatric wards and care facilities. So the dopamine agonist reintegrated many patients back into societies, but then it started this tardive dyskinesia, which means uncontrolled body movements. So it was messing up the rest of the system because it was causing too much problem. The newest generation of antipsychotics, including risperidone, Zyprexa, and Abilify, they managed to eliminate some of those adverse effects. These medications are often prescribed to adults to enhance the effect of their antidepressants. They are also prescribed as mood stabilizers in irritable children with aggressive disruptive behavioral disorders such as autism or ADHD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and Tourette's. But they have some of their own side effects. One possible side effects to their use is a flat affect. So when you give these drugs to a person, because that person is is pushed over to the right side of the dopamine curve, and they're pushed over there because they're either driving that curve, they're driving the dopamine over there, or they're destroying the receptors, that the dopamine receptors in the nucleus accumbens, so they're not feeling any pleasure in life. And so now they're over there and they become very irritable and psychotic. That's the point. It's that if we move ourselves to the right side of the curve, if we move ourselves to the right side of the curve, we become irritable and psychotic. That's the problem with this. It's not a great thing to be on the right side of the curve. We don't want to be over there. We don't want to have that over there. So if our environment, if our habits, if our eating, if our sugar, if our diet is contributing to us being pushed to the right side of the curve, it's going to increase our anxiety. It's going to increase our like she's asking about PTSD and anxiety and all of those things that we're trying to fight with the brain. But we're feeding it. We're feeding it because we're trying to get some sort of motivation and some sort of pleasure out of life. That's what we're trying to do with our sugar, and it's not great. It's not great. Okay, so let me get on to this because I want to get somewhere. That flat affect is where they just walk around and they're just zombie type person. These drugs also induce insulin resistance in the liver, driving insulin up, and with it, weight gain. Almost every week in my pediatric obesity clinic, I see a child under 10 who started their weight gain only when their doctor placed them on these mood stabilizers to prevent classroom disruption. And that's the problem I have with the model, is that the model is not addressing the cause of the problem. The model is addressing the result of the problem. And we don't like the result of the problem. So we're going to try to take a medication and we're going to try to implement that medication into the problem to try to solve the result of the problem to the kids that are having classroom disruptions. But we're not going to take into consideration that the reason that they're having those classroom disruptions and the reason that they have this right shifted dopamine experience is because of their nervous system is not working properly. They're overstimulated with their gaming devices. They're understimulated because they're not on their feet and moving. Their diet is whacked out with sugar, right? We're not going to take any of those responsibilities as parents. We're not going to take any of those responsibilities as teachers. We're not going to take any of those responsibilities as administrators. We're going to sell Coca-Cola in our schools so that we can make enough money to pay for our band trip or our football stadium. Yeah, I know that's the way it happens. And we're not going to take into consideration what's going on in our lunchrooms. We're not going to take into those consideration as to what's happening. We're just going to give this child a drug, and now we're going to push his dopamine way over to the left, and now they're going to start increasing their food and they're going to start disrupting their insulin. And if there's one thing that we've talked about on this show, we've talked about insulin disruption. Yeah. The dopamine molecule can be recycled and used again. They are brought back into the neuron and release them, repackaged into little storage vesicles. This is the function of the dopamine transporter, or DAT. Your DAT are akin to the childhood game Hungry Hippo. Y'all have seen that little deal where you hit the button and the little hippo swallows all those little marbles and brings them into yours. You try to see how many marbles you can get, right? They transport and suck dopamine back into the nerve terminal, removing it from synapses already for the next stimulus. One way to alter the function of the DAT is with various drugs. This is how cocaine acts, binding irreversibly to the DAT and taking it out of commission. So now what cocaine does is you can't get the dopamine reabsorbed back into the cell. That dopamine that was sent across is just hanging out in the cell, in the synapse all the time, because your dopamine transporters can't get it out of the cell, and that's what cocaine does to you. Your first bump of cocaine heightens sensation, but it doesn't last very long, leaving you wanting more. The DAT is also where methamphetamine or crystal meth acts by fooling the DAT into trying to transport it instead of the dopamine. So that's another thing that's happening when you're a meth user, or if you've got anybody in your family that's a meth user, is that it is tricking, instead of this dopamine transporter taking the dopamine out of the synapse and getting it away from those receptors so that those receptors don't get damaged or don't get reabsorbed into the cell wall. This now, what the methamphetamine is doing is it's tricking those receptors, that dopamine transporter, into, hey, eat me instead of the dopamine. And so what happens is we just drive the dopamine even further to the right side, and we start to create this damaging effect in the system when we're doing that. So when we're coming off of all this stuff, because I only have just a second, and then I might come back to this tomorrow night, because there's some things that I really want to cover, and I didn't do a great job of covering this tonight, but if we haven't destroyed the receptors, we can reestablish those receptors on the cell wall. Now, here's a problem. If we get out of treatment and then all of a sudden we go back to the same level, if I go back after 2 years and 3 months of not having a Reese's cup, and I go back to eating Reese's cups, and I go back to the same bag of Reese's cup that I ate before, I am going to create an overload to this thing. I'm going to create this is going to be a massive problem, because my receptors have come back, and then all of a sudden I didn't slowly bring my dopamine back up to the whole bag. If I just eat the whole bag. So when you go back and you think, well, I think I'll just take the same amount of alcohol that I took last time. That's not a good idea. And that's what you're doing is you're taking your meth and you're saying, well, I don't want meth anymore. So, but I think I'll trade it for sugar, or I think I'll go back and get my alcohol. And I am going to carry this over to tomorrow night, because I just tell you, the older I get, the more I study, the more I can tell you that alcohol is completely poison and we should just get rid of it. And I know that makes me sound like like an old fogey or whatever, but it's not serving us, and it's not serving us in any form or fashion. And this idea that if you're a parent and you think it's cool that you're drinking some beers with your son on a golf course, you're fooling yourself. You're absolutely fooling yourself. If you think it's okay to let your kids just have a couple beers. I don't understand why every parent in every town and just allows that to happen. My kids didn't drink alcohol. I didn't drink a single drop of alcohol before I was 21 years old. Not a single drop. My dad had the bluffing on me. I've had a butt whooping before. Yeah, that's where I'm leaving you right there. I appreciate you guys. I'm going to work on this, and we're going to do this again tomorrow night, and we're going to see if we can continue this whole thing on. So, thanks for the show. I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you guys tomorrow night with Life with Jason Clemmons, DC.